Our today's speaker is facing some technical issues. He will soon join us. Please be patient.
Okay, sir.
Dear participants, sorry for the inconvenience. Sir will join us within 5 minutes. There's some error in his system.
Okay, sir. Okay.
So he will join us within 5 minutes.
Okay, sir.
Okay, sir, no problem.
আমিও জানাম শিক্ষিত বুজি পাওঁ মানুহ এই মানুহটো জানে মোৰ বিষয়ে কাম নকৰিলেও পইচা মই কি কৈছো না পইচাটো ডাঙৰ বস্তু নহয় মানুহকেইটা বহুত ভাল লাগে কালি নেকি যে মোক কৈছিল দাদা বোলক 10 মিনিটৰ কাম আছে আপোনালোকে এইবিলাক কাম কৰা মানুহ নহয় মই জানো 10 মিনিটৰ কাম বুলি কিয় ক'ব অলপ কাম আছে বুলি কৈছে এই কামবিলাক এনেকুৱা নে আমি
সফিকুর স্যার আপনার মাইকটো অন হয়ে আছে সফিকুর রহমান স্যার আপনার মাইকটো অন হয়ে আছে
Shafiqur Rahman sir, please mute your microphone.
কালি ৰাতি লগ পাইছি নেকি তই দেখা যাবি না নাযা কালি মই কৈছো কিয় নাযাবা আপোনাক কথা দিয়াৰ পিছত নহব
সফিকুর রহমান স্যার আপনার মাইকটো অন হয়ে আছে স্যার
Dear participants, our today's speaker, Prof Satish Kumar, has just joined us. I hope that PPT is visible to all of you. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Ahmed to introduce our today's speaker, Dr. Satish Kumar, Chairperson, Department of Wildlife Science, Aligarh University, Aligarh.
Thank you, Dr. Masood. Good morning, dear participants. It's my honor to introduce our today's first session speaker, my teacher and mentor, Professor Satish Kumar. Professor Satish Kumar currently holds the position of professor and chairperson at the Department of Wildlife Sciences, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. He completed his master and MPhil degrees in zoology from the University of Jammu. Beginning his career at the Bombay Natural History Society in 1991, Professor Kumar completed his PhD on the ecology and behavior of grey wolf in Maharashtra, funded by US Fish and Wildlife Services. Professor Satish research primarily focus on grey wolf in India, utilizing radiotelemetry to investigate predator-prey dynamics in semi-arid grassland ecosystem of Deccan Plateau. Professor Satish Kumar collaborated with the Forest Department of Uttar Pradesh to address incidents of large carnivorous animals attacking children between 1996 and 2000. Additionally, he conducted research on birds communities in semi-arid regions of the Deccan. Professor Kumar underwent advanced training in large carnivores ecology at Kawasaki Field Lab, Northern Research Station of the US Fields Forest Services, working alongside Dr. L. David Mack and Dr. Michael Nilsson in the Superior National Forest, Minnesota. His work extends to surveillance of the bird disease in collaboration with the Bombay Natural History Society, investigating bird flu in wild birds in Uttar Pradesh, and studying the migratory behavior of bar-headed geese using satellite telemetry along with other waterfowl using bird rings. Professor Kumar has actively participated in numerous national and international conferences, symposia, and training programs. With 28 years of teaching and research experience, Professor Kumar has also published several books, book chapters, and papers in national and international journals. With these introductory remarks, I would like to extend a warm invitation to Professor Satish Kumar for today's lecture. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Kaleem. Thank you very much for a very elaborate introduction. I am sorry with the mess up, that was somehow, this system was updating the antivirus and then some of the software windows. So it was, somehow it was not taking the camera, and then, kept on. So once the antivirus was updated and some of the files of Windows updated, then it got basically connected, and Dr. Masood and Dr. Kaleem, they helped me. Somehow, one way or other, because the windows around, so it is always creating problem because the updates are aggregated, and then when you switch on or say turns your internet on, they start updating it, and then somehow it is not basically executing. Anyway, so let us good morning to everyone. Assalamu alaikum, and I wish you
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Yeah. So we'll be talking about biodiversity conservation in India and various or different approaches which are in place or mostly in India and also rest of the world. All these treaties, all these acts, sometimes local, sometimes international, they are in place to conserve the biological resources or biological values of the country. The government is also basically just 10 minutes. Okay. The government of India from time to time to make people public aware about the biodiversity and its values and their role in sustaining the economy. From time to time, they have been initiating several programs, temporary or say permanent or say time-bound programs to inculcate in people the values and how to preserve the biodiversity or what are its long-term goals to preserve and long-term benefits that we can derive from biodiversity or say biodiversity values in our country. Now, biodiversity, most of the students, geography, science people, they are students or say teachers, they are familiar with the term biodiversity. It is basically the sum total of the total, or you can say the total richness of organisms, plants, animals, microorganisms, which are occurring in a particular region, in a particular country, or in a particular continent. So we can say that variety and variability of life forms That basically is the biodiversity or biological diversity. Sometimes that biological richness, richness and diversity, they are basically terms which are mostly people who are not familiar or who are not basically studying so diversity or biodiversity in particular. They may sometimes misinterpret them. Basically, richness is the total number of species which are occurring in a particular habitat, particular region, particular continent. Whereas diversity is basically the richness plus distribution of the species, how a particular species is distributed, how it is, whether it is common, rare. So that basically both these factors, they contribute to biological diversity. Now, globally, it has been believed that speculated that for the last since 2000 or so, since last 24 years, about 70% of the intact forests they have dwindled or their diversity is basically losing. 7% of the forest that we have lost. And it is speculated that within the next few decades, about 1 million species will be lost with the rate at which the biodiversity values, they are deteriorating or they are declining. Now, it has been estimated that all over the world or the Earth, it harbors about 8.7 million species with a standard error of 1.3 million across world. And nearly 2.2 million of them, they are basically marine or they live in marine environments. The rest of them, they are in terrestrial habitats or on land. It is also speculated that nearly 86% of the species which are found on land, they are yet to be discovered. And similarly, about 90% of the species in the marine environments, they still are to be described, means they are not known. And people all over the world, they are doing this job annually. Several species of marine environments as well as terrestrial environments, they are being added to the list. Say in India, last year in 2023, there were 3 species of mammals which were discovered in India. And similarly, all over the world, especially the biodiversity-rich nations or countries, several taxa are being added from time to time. Now, there are many approaches to investigate or to conserve biodiversity. Some of them, there are several. Some of important ones are listed here, like say, what are the different acts which govern or say which have which exercises control on biodiversity conservation values. Then there are some action plans, there are some treaties, conventions, in situ conservation programs, and ex situ conservation programs, which cover various aspects of biodiversity conservation in India and rest of the world. Now, forests, they act as guardians and protectors of flora and fauna of wild in the country of a particular country. And the forests, they are in use in hands of majority of population, due to which the resources available are being consumed at an alarming rate, resulting in depletion. Now, all the forest lands, they are basically majority of the population living around the forest landscapes, they are basically directly or indirectly connected as well as dependent on the forest. And the uses are many in terms of fertility. The forest, they basically enrich soils, and rivers which are emerging from the forest, they transfer this basically biomass or this litter or say organic matter to the places where the rivers traverse or zigzag along the terrestrial landscapes. And the forests they are also the means of generating revenue for the state by supplying various raw materials and its most natural form to the industries globally. Means raw materials in the most natural form, they are being transported globally to the industries for, like say, pharmaceutical industries, and then cosmetics, and then day-to-day care human health products which are used, and they are basically the derivatives of biodiversity. Forests are the reason behind climate change and in controlling the quality of air and water. All of us know this, that forests, they moderate our climate, and they supply us fresh air, water, and so on, medicinal plants, and wood, fodder, minor and major forest produces, and so on. The users of the forest, they have no mindlessly or say irresponsibly utilized the forest for cultivation and destroyed them in the name of agriculture and other personal consumption of wood, timber, fuel, and fodder. All of us know this, that this is basically increasing day and day. So that is why these laws, acts, and treaties, they are being made more stringent so that people abide by the rules and the pressures on the forest and biodiversity resources. They are Biodiversity doesn't mean only forest, all wetlands, semi-lands, deserts, they all harbor biodiversity, and it's believed that wetlands are perhaps the hotspots of biodiversity. The wetlands, they harbor large number of species, even more than a forest, basically standing forest or stand of forest it harbors. So all these basically natural resources, they are very important and for preserving biological values or biological diversity of the country, and there is need for legislation and protecting and regulating forests, which was required, and Indian Forest Act 1927. It was basically major overhaul was done in the Forest Act that was initially launched or set up in 1865, then again amended in 1878, then 1927, and then 1980 was again Forest Act, which was basically passed through Parliament, Parliament of India, and no several no uses on forests. They were restricted, like say no tribes that were living in the forest, or say what you call indigenous communities, or what you call as the no. Tribal communities and scheduled tribes who are living in the forest, their uses also have been sort of regulated. The Act also imposed government control over forests by classifying them into forest, reserve forest, protected forest, and village forests. So these are the basically reserve forests are basically the forests where basically people grazing, etc., grazing, then logging of the trees, that basically is regulated, or it is not basically strictly controlled. Whereas in protected forests, this exercise people, or say people use of forest, like say grazing, or say entering forest and cutting, or say lopping trees, that is not basically allowed in protected forest. Village forests are basically community forests which are managed by the people. If there is a forest stand, that is basically by people, local communities, they manage the forests on their own, so that the resources or the biodiversity values, they do not dwindle, and they can keep using that village forest for time to come. The Act of 1927 is a comprehensive legislation incorporating all the pre-existing laws enacted to protect the forest, as well as the rights of the people residing in the forest. Okay, so rights of the people, they were basically also taken care of in the Forest Act 1927. As I told you, that the Forest Act was amended from time to time. It was amended in 78. Initially it was set up in 1865. In 1864, under the a German forester. He was basically employed by the government, British government in India, and then around 7 years later, he was raised to, or he was appointed as a Indian first Forest General, Inspector General of Forests of India, and during this time, Indian Forest Service was introduced. That was in 1863. 1863, the Indian Forest Service, which is called Imperial Forest Service, that was basically started. And 1906, Imperial Forest Research Institute was established in Dehradun, which is now Forest Research Institute. So this all basically, although all this basically, forest basically setting up of Imperial Forest Institute in Dehradun, and then IFS, or Indian Forest Service, that was basically started, and with this appointment of Dietrich Brandis in 1856. Now, it empowered the British government to declare any land covered with trees as government forest and make rules to manage it. 1878 Forest Act. The British administration required sovereignty over the forest. In 1865, it was basically that the forests are the government property. That was the main, basically, major objective or theme of the act. And 1878, it became a sovereign right of the British government that it is totally under the control of the British government or imperial government of British imperial government or under the colonial rule. 1878, the complete sovereignty of forests was given to the government. The act also enabled administration to demarcate, reserve, and protected forests. No, the forest and the protected forests, as I told you, that they were demarcated in protected forests. All grazing, all human activities or human-mediated activities, they are barred. They are not allowed. Whereas in reserve forests, such activities they are regulated by government, so that the communities which are basically dependent directly or indirectly in the forest, they keep harvesting the resources of the forest. The local rights were refused in the case of protected forests. As I told you that the local rights, that is the rights on the forest, they were refused, and some privileges that were given to the local people by government that can be taken and away anytime. It was not there, then it could be taken by government anytime. So that was the main difference between the 1978, 1927, and then compared to 1878, 1865 Forest Act. This we have discussed: reserve forest, protected forest, and village forest. So the act classified it into clear three. Later on, subsequently, forest types were classified into 16 major types and several subtypes, more than 30 subtypes. And it attempted to regulate the collection of forests. The main theme or objective of the act was to regulate the collection of forest produce by forest dwellers and some activities declared as offenses, and imprisonment and fines were levied or imposed in this policy to establish complete state control over the forests. So was appointed the first Inspector General Brandeis Dietrich, and in 1863, sorry if I have misspelled it, it is it was basically in 1863, and 1864 the Indian Forest Service, it was set up or say started, and then in 1866 1906 the 1906 the Imperial Forest Research Institute was established in Dehradun to train foresters all over the country, and which is still under way. And then Wildlife Institute of India, several other organizations, mainly the Wildlife Institute of India, the nodal agency of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, that was established in 88. And then since then, the foresters, they are being trained at FRI and the Wildlife Institute of India. Even IFS trainees or IFS officials, they are also trained or given imparted training to manage forests, to how to basically regulate forests in Dehradun. And also they have short-term courses like diplomas, which are executed every year for the foresters. Then in 1927 Act, basically it impacted the life styles of forest dependent communities, and the penalties and procedures which are given in this act, they aimed to extend the state's control over forests, as well as diminishing the status of people's rights to forest use. Means the complete forest control was with the government, and the people's rights for using forest, that was also diminished, or that was sort of controlled in this act. The village communities were separated from their old symbiotic relationship with forest. Means the surrounding communities around forests, protected forests and reserve forests, they were separated from their age-old practice of harvesting the forest or using the forest resources. Then further amendments were also made to restrain the local use of forests, mainly by the forest-dependent communities. No, city people don't have much to do with the forest, but it is mainly the village or rural populace that are basically directly having access to the raw material of the forest. Although city people also benefited, but through these local communities, the products are they're transported or they are taken to industries and then they are reached to in process form to the people living in the cities. Now then, a very comprehensive Forest Act, which was passed through the Parliament of India, that came into existence in 1980, and the act it gave authority to the British to restrict tribal activities by levying taxes on timber and forest. So this is basically we are talking about 1927 Act, right? That the Act of 1927 it gave authority to British people to restrict tribal activities by imposing taxes on timber and forest services or the collection of timber and forest produces from the forest. It mainly regulated the cutting of timber and flow of raw materials rather than protecting forests. So that was that. Then the Act 1980, the main basically theme was to control the ongoing deforestation of the forests, and that is how the Forest Act, Conservation Act 1980 came. The major emphasis was to stop to slow down the ongoing deforestation processes which are happening in the forests. The Indian Wildlife Protection Act 1972 that was basically launched in the regime of the Congress government, and people have been contemplating since 70s with the dwindling of the tiger numbers in the country. So this Wildlife Protection Act 1972 it was enacted, and which has 8 chapters, 60 sections, and 6 schedules which have no species classified, plants, animals, insects, butterflies, and all important major species which are listed in these schedules depending upon their status of current status of distribution, and the species are shuffled or reshuffled across the schedules depending upon their current status and distribution, which is revised from time to time by various conferences, schedules maintained or what you call as organized by government from time to time. Now, India has around 10 biogeographic zones ranging from Trans-Himalayas, Himalayas to deserts and very high rainfall areas in Northeast India, scanty rainfall in semi-arid and arid areas, and Deccan areas or Deccan Plateau of the country. So this is in Sariska, the scrub forest, having no forest groups, thickets, and dominated by semi-arid grasslands and scrublands, and dry deciduous forests. Most of the time it is basically without foliage, and most of the forests in the dry deciduous types can be seen green or having more biomass during monsoon and post-monsoon seasons. Rest of the time they are basically having less cover or say less leaf or less biomass. But as far as the productivity is concerned, the semi-arid areas are very highly productive, and that is largely because of the grasslands and scrublands, which contain several layers of vegetation and harboring several ungulates or what you call the insects, which are basically the predators of these grasses and scrublands. Then we have dense coniferous forests in the Himalayas. No, Himalayas are still pristine compared to rest of the areas because the population in Himalayas is less, or say less comparatively or relatively to the plains, where we have more humans per square kilometer or per hectare, and therefore the pressures on the plains are far higher than the Himalayas and Trans-Himalayas. This is a typical sal forest in Tri landscape, or say Tri landscape, Tri-arc landscape. having very high biomass of ungulates or deer species and several other large herbivores like say elephants, rhinoceroses, and deer species. Typical coniferous forests or say pine forests in the Shivalik region or Shivalik part or sub what you biotic province of the Himalayas. You can see the clean basically water of the rivers. If you compare this with the plains rivers, which are totally polluted. Himalayas, the riverine systems, they are still unpolluted, and the water is much quality of water is much better there. Similarly, if you go to northeast or say some parts of Western Ghats, then you see bamboo forests, very thick bamboo forests, which also support very high biomass. And the bamboo forests have a typical behavior that within 70 to 100 years, they flower. All the bamboo forests, they flower at once, and they become leafless for several decades, and they get degenerated. And with flowering, the seed bank on the ground that is increased, and several species, say rodents, they multiply, and then chances of spread of diseases or zoonotic diseases that also increases in this forest or say bamboo forest. Similarly, if you happen to go to Western Ghats, where the forests have continuously been chopped and converted into agricultural land or say commercial plantations like say coffee, tea, and rubber, and other cardamom and other important commercial plants that is happening all over the Western Ghats, especially on the fringe, and therefore fragmenting the entire landscape and making the movement of the species, especially the large species like elephants, gore, leopards, what you call is tigers, difficult moving across the patches of the forest. They fragmented because all year round, thousands of people, they are working in this altered habitats, and the animals are restricted from genetic studies which have been conducted by CCMB and some other premier organizations in the country indicate that species are having inbreeding depression, especially the large species, which are prevented from moving across these habitat types or across these fragmented pockets. Then we have action plans. Action plans are basically generally centered to conserve biological diversity. The action plans may be time-bound. They may be with respect to restoration of specific species of plants or animals, and often directed to inventorization of biological resources. That action plan is time-bound, and a team of people have to inventorize or make inventories of flora and fauna, and prepare a report and submit it to the government or the authorities that have basically funded that action plan. Then conservation of biodiversity through a network of protected areas, including national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere reserves, then tiger reserves, elephant reserves, marine reserves, gene banks, wetlands, mangroves, and coral reefs. They are also established sometimes under the action plan, or sometimes time bound after having received importance or significance of that particular area through biologists or other governmental and non-governmental agencies. Then rehabilitation of rural poor tribes displaced due to creation of protected areas, that is also covered under action plan. The people who are affected due to forest rights, or say with the declaration of forest sanctuaries, or say wildlife sanctuaries and national parks. So such rural tribes, they are also sometimes rehabilitated under action plan. Then sorry, the conservation of microorganisms that help in reclamation of wastelands and revival of biological potential of land, that is also sometimes covered under the action plans. And also control over exploitation of resources through various protocols, treaties, laws such as traffic and CITES. Traffic means trade-related analysis of flora and fauna in commerce. No, it is basically body which basically controls the trade of species of especially endangered species across globe. CITES is basically convention on international convention on trade of endangered species of flora and fauna, which was enacted in 1973. So these they also cover or say provide directly conservation measures for different species of flora and fauna. Then protection of domesticated plant and animal species in order to conserve indigenous genetic diversity. So that is also covered under the action plans, and the maintenance of corridors between different nature reserves and possible migration, so as to restore possible migration of species in relation to or in response to climate or any other disturbing factor that is also can be done under the or within the premises of the action plans. Then multiplication and breeding of threatened species. The IUCN, it has different action plans in place and captive breeding programs for threatened species that has been launched for various species across globe, and restriction of introduction of exotic species without adequate investigations. So introduction of exotic species that do not have adequate investigations or adequate information, that is basically that is taken up under the action plan, and such species are restricted for to introduce in different areas, different regions, or different countries. Then they also action plan. They also support protecting the traditional skills and knowledge for conservation. So that has been taken up under the Tribal Forest Act in 2006. Now, in conventions, Bonn Convention is a very important convention which was adopted in Germany in 1979, and it came into force in 1983. And it is an international treaty for conservation of migratory species of wild animals, that is both birds and animals, migratory basically animals, and also known as CMS, or Convention on Conservation of Migratory Species. So that and Bonn Convention, they are basically the same thing. It is again an important part of international environment conventions and protocols, and one of the oldest basically convention in the world. And the aim of the Bonn Convention is to protect the migratory species of wild animals and their land, and their habitats. So all the countries where these migratory species of birds and animals they migrate. So the respective governments, they basically take care of these migratory species so that their hunting or their habitats, they are not impacted by the people. There are at present 131 parties under the Bonn Convention or under the CMS. Then CITES was conceptualized in 1963 at a meeting of IUCN, and it came into force in 1975. And it is an international agreement between governments with objective of preserving planets, plants, and animals by ensuring that the international trade in their specimens does not threaten their survival. Roughly 5,600 species of animals and 30,000 species of plants, they are protected under CITES against exploitation or overexploitation through international trade. And there are two appendices in CITES, Appendix 1 and Appendix 2, which basically include species depending upon the status of their endangerment or the danger of extinction, which are those species, those taxa which are in the danger of extinction, they are included in Appendix 1, and those which need continuous monitoring so that their trade doesn't become a threat for these species in future. Such species or taxa, they are covered under Appendix 2. Then another important convention is Ramsar Convention, which was basically signed in 1971 in a famous Ramsar site or say city of Iran around the Caspian Sea, around sea, in 1971, and it came into force again in 1975. There are 171 contracting parties which have signed this convention, and it comes with a mission to conserve and use wisely all wetlands through local and national actions and international cooperation as a contribution towards achieving sustainable development throughout the world. So this is implemented all over the world, and 171 contracting parties are there that are legally bound to undertake this convention. As of June 2021, there are 2,422 wetlands which are listed as wetlands of international importance in the Ramsar Convention, and there are 42 in India, and many more potential Ramsar sites in India. They have been identified by MOEF and Bombay Natural Society. Originally, this treaty it focused on conservation of habitats for water birds, right? Then there is another very important scheme which is called the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Well-being, sorry, which have been launched by Government of India, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. It's a very ambitious project of the government which aims to bring biodiversity and conservation to the forefront of Indian science, policy makers, policy and society's attention. And the mission proposes a national effort that aims to transform biodiversity science by linking people to their economic prosperity. Means how can the biodiversity values they can be linked to the economic prosperity of the country. It has been undertaken in this project, or say in this scheme. And various research institutions, government and non-governmental organizations, they are working together to catalog, map, assess, monitor, and use our vast declining resources in the country. The mission will also help create a cadre of biodiversity science professionals to sustain and secure Indian biodiversity, means to train people to produce a battery of people in biodiversity science or biodiversity science professionals who can lead or who can undertake the biodiversity mission, or say protecting biodiversity of the country by collating, by say information, and then by collaborating with various organizations which are connected to biodiversity conservation. The mission hopes to initiate a mass movement to engage India's massive population to feel pride of our national heritage and help restoring and conserving nature. If you remember, in 2012, the MOEF and CNC, they started basically train biodiversity train which basically continued. It started in July 2012, and for 3 years the train it moved almost all over the country for 3 years, making people aware about the biodiversity and linking biodiversity to the economic prosperity of the country. Then we have in situ conservation of biological diversity and protected areas network under basically for conserving biological diversity of the country. Now, in situ conservation means that conserving biological diversity per se as they are occurring in their natural habitat, so protecting them in their natural habitat. So these can be achieved by building a network of protected areas across different landscapes, different biographic regions. Then only it is possible to have comprehensive conservation plan for the biodiversity values of the country. Now, protected areas are basically the conservation areas that are established on land and water, maybe fresh or maybe marine, in which human occupation or at least the exploitation of resources by humans is prohibited or regulated, or it is limited. And the protected areas are basically taken up under Chapter 4 of the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, and tiger reserves are notified under Chapter 4B, titled as NTCA, or National Tiger Conservation Authority of India. Under this, the tiger reserves, they are taken up since 2006. Now, the protected areas are basically the locations which receive protection because of the recognized natural, cultural, and ecological values or importance. The major purpose of building network of protected areas across landscapes is to conserve the biological diversity. Now, there are about more than 2 lakh protected areas world over, presenting or representing 10 to 15% of the world's terrestrial and marine area under these protected areas. So 10 to 15% of the total land mass is protected as protected areas all over the world. In India, it is nearly 5% or 5.202%. Now, the conservation planning in India is based on the philosophy of identifying, protecting representative wild habitats across ecosystem. No, there are extensive areas, so we cannot declare very large, but at least representative. Some percentages of these different regions, different forest types, protecting them under these different categories of protected areas. There are about 981 protected areas till date, and which are covering nearly 5% of the total geographical area. And out of this, there are 105 national parks, 566 wildlife sanctuaries, 97 perhaps they have exceeded now 97 conservation reserves, and 214 community reserves. Apart from this, there are 53 now tiger reserves and 32 elephant reserves, which are spread over tiger reserve over 18 states and elephant reserves over 16 states. So these are the different biogeographic zones, like say Trans Himalayas, then what do you call? Sorry, Trans Himalayas, then Himalayas, then Gangetic Plain, then semi-arid, then arid or deserts, then Western Ghats, then we have Deccan Plateau, then I have Gangetic Plain and Northeast India, then coast, West Coast and East Coast. Sorry, East Coast and West Coast. So and then islands. That is another biogeographic zone. So that is the biogeographic classification. Now, all these basically dots which are represented on this map, they are basically the protected areas like say wildlife sanctuaries, national park, conservation reserves, and community reserves. Most of these areas are very small, very ranging in size from few hectares to few square kilometers. Very few areas are there which are say more than 100 square kilometers most, but rest of them they are very small, very uh, uh, ranging in size, few hectares. Now, this is the statistics of basically different percentages and the areas which are covered under these protected areas. Then, now national parks are basically the areas which have again adequate ecological, floral, faunal, and geomorphological and zoological significance for which basically they are declared as national parks, and then they are established for the purpose of protecting and propagating or developing wildlife throughout the country. And also, it is an area which is strictly reserved for the betterment of wildlife, and where activities like forestry, grazing, and cultivation they are not allowed or they are not permitted. And private ownership rights they are also not allowed. Means the people who are basically residing there around the fringes, they are basically their ownership is prevented on these forests, national park. Whereas in sanctuaries, to some extent, it is allowed. They are open for scientific studies, but of course, one has to take prior permission from the state wildlife authorities and the central government if they want to carry out studies in national parks. And the emphasis is for preservation of either single species of plant or animal. There are some sanctuaries or there are some national park where the target species is some key plant species or keystone plant species or some other animal species, or it may not be so. Then for the whole, basically all biological values, all biodiversity values which are found in that area. Then it also has adequate, the wildlife sanctuary also has an adequate ecological, flora and faunal, and geomorphological, natural or zoological significance, for which it is a wildlife sanctuary, that for which it is declared as a wildlife sanctuary. And the wildlife sanctuary assure a national condition is necessary, sorry, to assure national condition which is necessary to protect a species, a group of species, biotic communities, or physiological features of the environment. So a wildlife sanctuary ensure all these measures for protection. And private ownership rights, unlike the national parks, are allowed here as long as they do not interfere with conservation, preservation, and well-being of animals. I mean, as long as it is sustainable, the private ownership rights, they are allowed in wildlife sanctuary, but when they become unsustainable, then it is no more allowed. And all that is exercised or controlled by the government or say state forest uh, mm, officials, state biodiversity boards, and the central government. Then controlled harvesting of minor forest produces, sometimes major forest produces, they are permitted in wildlife sanctuaries with prior permission from state biodiversity boards and state biodiversity authorities or state wildlife departments. Sorry. The main difference between national park and wildlife sanctuary lies in entrusting the rights of the people. So this is the key point on the basis of which a national park and wildlife sanctuary it can be differentiated. Unlike a wildlife sanctuary where certain rights can be allowed, no rights of people are allowed in a national park. We have already talked about this. And no livestock grazing is permitted inside national park. But in a wildlife sanctuary, the chief wildlife warden, that is CWLW, annotated CWLW, may regulate, control, or even prohibit the livestock grazing or harvesting of the resources. Any removal or utilization of wildlife or forest produce from a wildlife sanctuary, it requires the recommendation of the state board, state biodiversity, state board for wildlife, whereas removal of utilization of any such wildlife or produce from a national park requires recommendation of the national board for wildlife. So state board for wildlife basically permits utilization of resources or wildlife resources from a wildlife sanctuary, whereas from national park, the NBWL or say National Board for Wildlife that basically requires. There was a petition, no litigation in Supreme Court in 1995 that the state or the removal or utilization of biodiversity resources from wildlife sanctuary, it should also be permitted by the National Board for Wildlife. Then conservation reserve. Now they are declared by the state governments, and any area which is owned by government, particularly the areas which are located adjacent to the national parks or wildlife sanctuaries, they can be linked to these protected areas by declaring the conservation reserves in these reserve. Not all corridors, not only basically areas which are linking the national park to other national park or a national park to a wildlife sanctuary or two adjacent wildlife sanctuaries, all such corridors, they cannot be declared as community reserves, but some of the important, depending upon the importance, depending upon the significance of a species or biodiversity resources or values which are present there, represented there, depending on that, a conservation reserve may be declared in such link areas, corridors or passages which connect these protected areas. Now, such declarations are made after having consultation with the local communities. So, bringing local communities in confidence is important for declaring conservation reserve. Now, they are declared for the purpose of protecting landscape, seascape, flora and fauna, and their habitat. So, means free flow of genes, which is basically hampered if two protected areas they are not connected, especially the large species, they are prevented from moving across these patches or these protected areas. They can be saved or they can be declared as conservation reserves, and the free flow of genes can be restored in such protected areas. The rights of the people living inside a conservation reserve, they are not affected like a national park or partly in a wildlife sanctuary. There are 97 conservation reserves in India, for example, Assam, Baraj Conservation Reserve in Uttarakhand and Himachal, Jilmil Jheel or Jilmil Tal in Uttarakhand. Then Thiruvaidharamuru Conservation Reserve in Tamil Nadu was declared on 14 February 2005, the first conservation reserve which was established in the country. Then community reserves are basically can be declared again by the state government in any private land or community land not comprised within the national park and sanctuary, right? So any private land, any community land, in consultation with the state biodiversity board, state forest officials, or state chief wildlife warden of the state, they can be declared as community reserves. Now, the community reserves are declared for again for the purpose of protecting the flora and fauna and the traditional or cultural conservation values and practices which are prevailing there since time immemorial. So these areas can be protected by declaring them as community reserves in consultation with government bodies or in consultation with state forest officials. Now, the rights again here are within a community reserve are not affected, unlike national park totally and partially in a wildlife sanctuary. Uh, the main difference between a community reserve and conservation reserve is that most of the conservation reserves, as I told you, that they generally happen to be located within in the vicinity of uh, protected areas, that is national park and wildlife sanctuaries or tiger reserves, whereas community reserve, they may be located anywhere in community owned land or in private land or in a plantation or private forest patch. And so that is the difference. There are 214 community reserves in the country, and Keshopurcham Community Reserve in Gurdaspur is one of the oldest community reserve in India. Now, other sites of conservation importance are like, say, tiger reserves, which have now increased to 53, and then the latest one is in Chhattisgarh, Guru Ghasidas Tiger Reserve, and then elephant reserves, 32, which are spread over 16 states and covering more than 18,000 square kilometer area. Tiger Reserve covering more than 71,000 square kilometer area. Then biosphere reserves are another very important areas, which are huge, large areas covering several reserve forests, villages, rural areas, and then rivers, wetlands, and so on and so forth, plantations, right? So they are they are the biosphere reserves. There are 18 at the moment, and in India, which are spread over 15 states, one union territory, and there are 701 biosphere reserves, which are found or spread over 124 countries all over the world. Then we have World Heritage Sites, which are 40 in India and spread over 17 states. And tiger reserves are basically the areas for protecting or for giving protection to tigers and their prey species. Then Project Tiger was launched soon after the Indian Wildlife Protection Act came into existence in 1972. This was basically primarily late Mrs. Indira Gandhi is basically brainchild. She was behind basically launching this Project Tiger, and late Dr. Salim Ali, then WWF International, WWF India. These were the bodies which were basically connected or associated for launching Project Tiger in India, because their numbers were declining alarmingly. Less than 2,000 tigers were left in the country when this Project Tiger was launched in 1973, which were tigers, the numbers were about 40,000 in the beginning of 20th century. That is by 1950, 1920, there were about 40,000 tigers which were hunted out and left to around 2,000 in 1970s. Starting from 9 tiger reserves in 1973-74, the number has now increased to 53. Then biosphere reserves are the unique areas for sustainable development under the diverse ecological, social, and economic context, which influence the lives of more than 250 million people all over the world. No, unlike biosphere, unlike other protected areas like national park, wildlife parks, wildlife sanctuaries, conservation reserves, and community reserves, biosphere reserves are huge areas, usually more than 5,000 square kilometers. So, means the chances, or say, of giving more protection or higher protection to biodiversity values is more can be seen in biosphere reserves, and at the same time, though people, livestock, communities also living side by side in the forests or in the aquatic habitats, or say regimes which are found in such biosphere reserves. A biosphere reserve is a unique disposition of ecosystem of terrestrial and coastal areas which are internationally recognized within the framework of UNESCO's Man and Biosphere Reserve Program. Now, it is a special category of protected areas where human population also forms a part of the ecosystem or part of the system. As I told you that within biosphere reserves, there are livestock, there are agricultural lands, there are no forestry lands, then there are livestock populations, human populations that are residing within the biosphere reserve. So it's a very good examples. Biosphere reserves are classical examples of coexistence of humans and wildlife in the same area. They are the large protected areas which are usually more than 5,000 square kilometers in size. Uh, the following are the important objectives of biosphere reserves, that is in situ or say per se or as such conservation of biodiversity of natural and semi-natural ecosystems and landscapes. And also, a biosphere reserve targets to contribute to sustainable economic development of human population vis-a-vis the biosphere reserves, human population vis-a-vis biosphere reserves. They also provide facilities for long-term ecological studies, environmental education, and training and research and monitoring for people. Now, we can study the impact of people or livestock or agricultural practices on the natural ecosystems in a biosphere reserve, because both are existing there. So what biotic pressures or what anthropogenic pressures the human populations and their livestock or their practices, day-to-day practices are resulting on a natural land, that can be studied very well in a biosphere reserve. Now, within the biosphere reserves, we can see a core zone, a buffer zone, and transition zone. A core zone is basically undisturbed, legally totally protected area, whereas buffer zone lies within the core zone and the transition zone, and some of the research and educational activities, tourism, etc., are permitted within the buffer zone. Whereas in transition zone, which is the outermost part of the biosphere reserves, here cropping, forestry, recreation, fisheries, and other activities like training programs, etc., they are undertaken. And but for management purpose, it has no five. A biosphere reserve has five different zonations or zone types, like say core zone, then manipulation, where basically manipulation is with respect to three exercises or three broad types of activities which are conducted or carried out there, like say forestry, tourism, and agriculture. So in area where the forestry practices are undertaken, that is forestry manipulation zone, and where tourism manipulation zone, where agricultural practices are underway or undergone are taking place, that is agriculture manipulation zone. And then restoration zone is basically includes the degenerated areas or degenerated pockets within the biosphere reserve. Means say with the continuous activities in an area, the area becomes deteriorated or degenerated, the biological values, they start declining there. So that area, once it is identified, then it is restored or it is left devoid of human activities for 4, 5 years, 10 years, and then that is called as the restoration zone, where human activities are not carried out for the time being, and they will be restored when the area is restored or land is regenerated. Now, these are the 18 biosphere reserves which are basically located across the different regions in the country. And then World Heritage Sites, another basically conservation areas. As I told you, in India, we have 40 heritage sites, and 7 are national, 32 are cultural, and 1 is mixed World Heritage Site. And as far as the global scenario is concerned, the greatest number of World Heritage Sites are basically in Italy, that is 53, and then followed by China, where we have 52, and then Spain, France, Germany, and India. Then Mexico has 32 World Heritage Sites. The number are basically increased. The World Heritage Sites are, like say, some of the important, say, old railways, like say, this Konkan Railway, that is also World Heritage Site. Then Kalka Shimla track, that is also a World Heritage Site. Then Victoria Terminus or Shivaji Chhatrapati Terminus or railway station in Mumbai, that is also a World Heritage Site. Like Kyoladev National Park in Bharatpur, that is also a World Heritage Site. Kaziranga National Park is a World Heritage Site. So there are some of the protected areas which are also national parks and also World Heritage Sites. Then besides this, some of the prestigious projects which have been launched by the government are like, say, Snow Leopard, um, uh, 2009, then Project Buster, 2012, conceptualized and basically under process or under basically the process where basically captive breeding of busters is taking place and their rehabilitation in the wild, it will be starting very soon. Now the biodiversity, sorry, values, as far as we can classify them into ecological, economical, and cultural. No, ecological means the watersheds, tropical, subtropical rainforests. No, they all serve as ecological no values for biodiversity. Then thousands of flora and faunal elements and their assemblages. They are basically of ecological significance to the people. Ecosystem services, it's difficult to quantify ecosystem service, but roughly we say that even air, everything, by water bodies, recharging of the aquifers, day-to-day sustenance of rural communities, rural populace, they are sustained on forest resources. So they are basically all the ecosystem services. Difficult to quantify ecosystem services, but no, from time to time, the people are trying to make the assessment methods more rigorous so that we can quantify that how much basically revenue or how much economy is generated through ecosystem services provided by the ecological systems or say ecosystems all over the world. Regional connectivity of these systems is very important. So it has to be regionally, the various systems landscapes, they have to be regionally connected so as to maintain the gene flow for taxa across the different ecosystems. Then values also can be ascertained or assessed in terms of economy or revenue, like say subsistence and supplemental income, which is generated by biodiversity values, irrigation and power, hydroelectric power generated through biodiversity values, the rivers, which are originating in Himalayas or in the plains. So a lot of hydroelectric dams, turbines are there, which are generating a lot of power and sustains everyone's life, industries, and so on and so forth. Tourism, lot of tourism, lot of awareness for tourism is being created in India and rest of the world, and it is connected to basically generating revenue, which is used by the forest officials and the government in restoring and maintaining the economy. The cultural values are basically the religious sites, then the indigenous people who are basically living in the tribes, which are living what you call as the mm, indigenous tribal people, or what you call as the no traditional people who have been connected to the forest since thousands of years. So the basically maintaining them, maintaining their populations, and also culturing the values, the traditional values which they have culture within them. So training them and maintaining those values for times to come. So that is also a basically cultural aspect of biodiversity values. And then some of the important uh, uh, biodiversity World Heritage Sites, National World Heritage Sites are like, say, Western Ghats, Great Himalayan National Park, Nanda Devi, Biosphere Reserve, Manas, Wildlife Sanctuary, Keoladev National Park or Ghana National Park, Kaziranga National Park. These are some of the natural World Heritage sites. This is a typical Shola forest, which is basically seen in the Western Ghats. Unique system, nowhere else seen in the country. You have forest patches, where then you have, all of a sudden you land in a open area, which is called as the Shola forest or Shola grasslands. So Shola forest and then Shola grassland. So you don't see this kind of habitat or what you call ecosystems in rest of the country. So they are again very important, having very important species, endemic species, which are basically found in this Shola grasslands and Shola forests. Great hornbill, which is basically found in the Trai area or Indian Trai arc landscape and northeast India, typically in the sal forest or say evergreen and moist deciduous forests of northeast India and the Tarai. The typical oak forest or oak pine forest, mixed forest in the Himalayas, you can see basically the pristine ecosystem in the forest, and you can imagine the number of species which may be documented, which can be basically documented here. If you perhaps use 100-meter by 100-meter quadrant, perhaps you will notice hundreds or say thousands of species in such areas which are less disturbed or not disturbed. Valley of Flowers is another pristine area in now it is pristine because you have to track and reach several kilometers, 20-25 kilometers to reach here. So because of this, perhaps the area is still left pristine. Perhaps if the roads reach there, then perhaps within few years, the area will become like we have most of the areas in the plains. Lion-tailed macaque, or called abbreviated LTM, this is a flagship species of Western Ghats, found in highly fragmented landscape of Western Ghats. Thank you very much. So that is all about the biodiversity conservation or different approaches to biodiversity conservation within India.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
So
you,
we
Thank
sir.
you,
have
sir.
So much,
Thank
sir.
you
That was a
Thanks a
wonderful
lot.
talk.
Thank you so much, sir.
Audience, if you have any questions, you can
बहुत
ask.
बहुत धन्यवाद सर
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
थैंक यू
Excellent,
सर
sir.
थैंक
So
यू
much.
Thank you, sir.
Great information, sir. Thank you very much.
Sir,
yes, please. Yes, please.
it was a very nice presentation, sir, you have presented. Sir, my
Thank you.
simple question
Mhm.
is, sir, as fishes are also a part of the biodiversity, but still the fishes are not taken under the wildlife conservation. Sir, is there any, can you put some light on this, sir?
Sea fish are, of course, a part of the biodiversity because all no species, that is richness of the species, all species of flora, fauna, and microorganisms, insects, they are all basically wildlife plants. No, they are also fish are definitely very important. Say we have around 2,500 species of fishes which are found all over the country, and no huge ecosystem services the fishes they are providing, and a lot of economy is generated by selling fish resources of India. And there are several species of fish which have been listed in schedules of Wildlife Protection Act of India. And there are several basically university people. There is a Fish Survey of India who are directly dealing with the conserving or say dealing with the fish resources of India. And from time to time, the fishes like say there are some exotic species which have been introduced in India, especially in the south, in the Deccan, and many of these which are very fast, prolific breeders, and they are extending the range towards north, and it is now very difficult to get rid of these species because they have invaded most of the habitats. So fish species are being basically conserved, and there are some fishes which are listed in schedule, and of course conservation measures are in place for conserving fish. But most of the people, they think that fishes are the unlimited resource. Like water, we think that water is unlimited resource. It is not so. fishes. There are many species, like say, what you call, which is found in north, that is Mashir, which is found in, say, Ramganga in Corbett. No, it is threatened. No, it is threatened. So hunting is banned. So fishes are a very important integral part of wildlife, and they are also conservation measures in place for fishes.
Yes, sir. Yes. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir, for
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
such an wonderful talk. No, on behalf of all of you, I extend heartfelt gratitude to Professor Satish Kumar for an enlightening disclosure on biodiversity conservation, its critical acts, action plans, and the imperative needs for conservation. Your expertise and passion, sir, have illuminated our understanding of intricate web of life and urgency of preserving it. Your insights into actionable strategies resonate deeply, inspiring us to translate knowledge into meaningful action. Your dedication to this cause serve as a beacon of hope in our collective pursuits of sustainable future. We are immensely grateful to you, sir, for your time, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to environmental stewardships. Your talk, sir, has not only enriched our minds, but also encouraged our resolves to be protective agents of the change. Thank you for igniting the spark of conservation within us, sir, and empowering us to make a difference. Thank you once again, sir, for accepting our invitation and for kindly sparing your valuable time for today's talk. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kleem. Thank you so much for, I hope that most of the people, most of the teachers who are participating, some of the notes they can make, and then some of these things are buzzwords in teaching programs, whether at school level, college level, university level. So all of us should be familiar with biodiversity approaches, biodiversity values of the country, and the kind of pressures which are undergoing and increasing every year on these species, and we are losing so many species, and at the same time discovering new species, but perhaps the rate of losing is far more than the discovery curves, than the discovery curves of species which are being discovered. So thank you very much. Thank you for all the
Thank you,
participants
sir.
for
Thank you,
joining
sir.
this.
Thank
And
you very much, sir.
thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
बहुत
Dr.
बहुत धन्यवाद।
Faizan,
Thank you very much, sir.
for
Thank
inviting
you
me
so much, sir.
to this talk.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you so
sir.
much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Okay,
very
dear participants, we will meet again at 11 a.m. for the next sessions. And no, we will discontinue this session and we will meet at 11. Thank you so much.
Okay, sir.
much.
Thank you.
Okay, sir.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you.